But just sticking around to look at a lot of different stuff, like some of the AR stuff that they're adding in, looking at Spotlight. So in terms of grading this, I say I actually would give it an A, just because I think they're falling in line with what you can expect for a company that's been around already, like you said, for 9 up to almost 10 years at this point.
Hey gang, it's Monday, August 2nd. Nazmul and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, a new marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by one of our forecasting analysts. It's Nazmul Islam.
What's up, eMarketer Podcast Nation?
Whoa, that was quite... Howdy. Today, I did not see that coming. Today's fact: the world produces more than 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet. Although the United Nations doesn't expect the world's population to reach 10 billion until 2050, we already produce enough food to feed that many folks, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Obviously, we just waste a lot. In America, in 2017, between 30 to 40% of food supply was wasted, according to the US Department of Agriculture, USDA. In a 2020 study published in the American Journal of Agriculture Economics found that the average US household wasted 32% of its food. That works out to nearly $2,000 per household in wasted food. Some sobering statistics to start this episode. What we're really talking about is Snapchat. So today, talking about Snapchat. As Nick Routley of Visual Capitalist reminds us, in 2012, Snapchat changed its name from Peekaboo to Snapchat. The next year, Mark Zuckerberg tried to buy them. Evan Spiegel said no. Then Snapchat launched Stories. Mark said, how about $3 billion for Snapchat? And Evan said no again. The company launched Snapchat Ads in 2014 and continued to ascend from there. 2018 redesign tripped them up. Somewhere towards the end of 2019, they found their footing. But how is Snapchat getting on now? Very well indeed, it would seem. That's more. We're going to go through their user highlights, their revenue highlights, what to expect for the rest of the year. Let's start with the users. The highlights, two things mainly. Number one, Snapchat added 13 million new users worldwide from Q1 to Q2, reaching 293 million users. Q2's year-on-year growth was a little better than Q2 2020. By region, North America and Europe experienced typical Q2 growth of 1 to 2 million new users. That's quarter on quarter. By region, North America and Europe experienced typical Q2 growth of 1 to 2 million new users added from the previous quarter. The rest of the world added 9 million new users and experienced a 56% year-on-year growth. The rest of the world now accounts for 40% of the total users for the company. That's up from 26% in early 2019. And Nazmul, what jumps out to you with regards to Snapchat's Q2 user highlights?
What really jumps out to me is the high level of growth coming outside of the US.
Yep.
In our own Snapchat forecasts at eMarketer, we have pretty much US and other big countries kind of slowing down, especially in Europe. We're only forecasting around 87 million monthly active Snapchat users in 2021. That's only under a growth of just under 3%. But we did expect Snapchat to add around 40 million monthly active users globally. And what we're getting from them, especially in these first two quarters, is coming in line with that, the tremendous amount of growth they're having outside of the US. And it makes sense that they're adding all these users with all the new features and product innovation that they're adding, trying to get more people on the platform. I think even in their reading, they said that, especially compared to last year, a lot less people are actually looking at friends' stories, but just sticking around to look at a lot of different stuff, like some of the AR stuff that they're adding in, looking at Spotlight. So in terms of grading this, I say I actually would give it an A, just because I think they're falling in line with what you can expect for a company that's been around already, like you said, for around 9 up to almost 10 years at this point. You'd think that they wouldn't be growing as fast as they are, but they continue to.
And just to specify, they're counting daily active users. That's what we're talking about here. You mentioned Spotlight. Yeah, Spotlight, their user-generated content platform. They saw daily active user growth of nearly 50% quarter on quarter. They had a few other highlights from some of their different features. They said, you mentioned augmented reality, over 200 million users now engage with augmented reality AR on Snapchat every day on average. Their visual search feature, Scan, is tried by 170 million folks each month. and Snap original shows reach over 30 million unique users in the US. Sarah Fisher of Axios was pointing out that this higher user growth suggests people will continue to rely on social media as the pandemic shifts daily habits. She says streaming companies face more risk of user growth slowdowns. Nazmul, do you agree with that? Do you think that Snapchat will benefit or it will suffer a setback as people's pandemic behaviors shift back to something more typical of what things were like?
Typically, I would think that they would actually be affected negatively, similar to a bunch of other digital companies like the streaming service they mentioned, just because as things get back to more of a normality, more people you think would be spending time outside, be hanging out with friends and stuff, and just all in all be active in other things besides being on their phone. Especially like just think about people having to commute to work and stuff again around late 2021. That's a lot less time people have to be on their phone at home and just doing whatever. But the only counterpoint after is that like Snapchat said that their Spotlight and AR technology are growing. And while that may not have as much like long term or as much like screen time spent in one moment as you would be if you're like looking at a friend's like post and stuff like that, that does retain like usage at least in frequency. So people will still be going onto their Snapchat every month or every week, maybe to try out that AR functionality, maybe if they're shopping or something like that.
Yes. Snapchat, from their perspective, they were saying, well, Snapchat's meant to be used outside, so they are hoping for a boost. But you make a really good point. People are going to have to go and do all those other mundane things that they maybe didn't have to do over the pandemic, and they're just going to lose that time overall, which could affect their numbers. Interesting to see where it goes. Also, an interesting note from the company, Apple recently started asking iPhone people to let each app know if they're okay being tracked for ad purposes, ad tracking transparency. Snap said its users were opting into tracking more often than some of the industry's reported averages. They didn't specify, but they don't expect to see the full effect of the change until at least Q3. Mobile measurement company Branch recently found that across the industry, people are opting to give apps permission to track their behavior just 25% of the time. That was reported in an Ad Age article citing Bloomberg News. Let's talk about their revenue highlights. Nazmul, let's get a letter grade for those. So the highlights, Snapchat has been expecting 80% year-on-year growth in Q2. That's what I was expecting, but instead sped past that projection, reaching 116% total revenue growth, booking $982 million in the quarter. And North America, Q2 revenue also more than doubled year on year, still accounting for over 70% of the total money the company makes. Europe and rest of world revenue nearly doubled respectively. What jumps out to you about their revenue highlights in Q2, and what letter grade do you give Snapchat?
The first thing that really jumped out to me is like just the amount of growth doubling from the year prior. Like a high growth was expected, and even internally we're expecting a lot of high growth. We forecast them to surpass around 3.2 billion in worldwide ad revenue, and that's off a growth of 48.6% for the overall year in 2021. And specifically in the US, we were expecting 1.8 billion, still off a growth of like around 45%. So it's not like, we were expecting them to have a drop off or anything, but they still blew those expectations out the water. So I would obviously have to give this an A in terms of performance, just because I think no one thought that it could go this well. And the only caveat I guess I have to put in there is that we have to keep in mind that the comparison from the previous quarter was right in the middle of the pandemic. That's when a lot of the digital companies that did have a downturn would expect it in that Q2 area. So a lot of the high level growth is coming from that. It's just compared to very lower numbers from the previous quarter. But also, I guess a caveat to the caveat, if that's a thing, is that they've
throw an extra.
They never really had a growth in a quarter above $1 billion in terms of the actual revenue made, and they got really close this quarter to it. Yeah. And internally in eMarketer, when we're forecasting out, we thought that they probably would have growing over $1 billion sometime within this year. It might be next quarter, just based on the results we got this one.
Yes. They're expecting, Snapchat did say they're expecting revenue to increase approximately 58 to 60% year on year in Q3. That would be good enough for around $1.1 billion, but that's just a projection. As to your point, that's not happened yet. These numbers, these were Q4 style numbers. Really, really impressive. The numbers they hit in Q2 were each higher than their Q4 numbers. For revenue, their revenue 982 was higher than the 911 they posted in Q4. The North America 702 was higher than the 659 from Q4, and so on and so forth. few of the things that jumped out to me. So for the first few months of 2020, pre-pandemic, Snapchat's share price lived in the low teens. These days, it's closer to $70. So the share price is way up, and it's reflective of just how people feel about the company now. North America average revenue per user was up an incredible 116% year on year, same as revenue. Rest of world average revenue per user was finally back in the black, up 20%. And understandably, they lost half as much as they had lost last Q2 with a net loss of 150 million for Q2 2021. That was 300 million they lost last year. Nazma, what do we expect to see from Q3 and Q4? You've already kind of touched on some of our full year figures, but with regards to revenue and users, how do we see the final 2 quarters playing out?
So for the next 2 quarters, I still think they're going to do pretty well. And like you said, they had the expectation of surpassing a billion in revenue for the next quarter. I think they will do that. And I think the following quarter might even beat that. So honestly, in their overall yearly growth, I think it's going to be even higher than the 45 and to 48% for US and worldly respectively that we have based on the growth rate that they're going at now. They're going to continue to invest in all this technology, the return on investment products for advertisement, dynamic ads, all these little things that businesses are really interested in and really seem to be finding successful. So all that should translate to continued growth. User side, it's a little bit more unclear just because they have so many users already. It might see a little bit fall off. Still going to be positive growth regardless, but maybe not as fast. But definitely on the revenue side, I expect them to keep growing at a pretty high clip rate.
Yeah, they're, over the last, look at the last 6 quarters, they've gone 21%, 17, 19, 22, 22 and 23% growth. That's the year-on-year growth the last 6 quarters. So they've averaged out at the kind of high teens, low 20s. And their Q3 growth typically a little bit higher, even pre-pandemic, a little bit higher than Q2, if that's anything to go by. That is all we've got time for the first half. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in about 30 seconds. Nazmor, if you had to point to 1, maybe 2 takeaways from Snapchat's Q2 earnings, what are we looking at?
The first thing I'd point out, obviously, the big revenue splash. And they're doing it while all these other digital companies are also being successful. And so they can compete with the best of them is what they're showing. And the other thing I take away is that a lot of the growth is coming from outside of the US. So this company, while being really tied to Apple in the past and being so negatively affected by changes to the app on the Apple phones and being tied to the US market, now it's showing that it could really expand, and now it won't be as affected by just one side of things. They're expanding outside of the world, and they have a lot of Android users now too, almost as much, if not more, than their Apple user base. So it shows that they have a diverse user base and they have diverse ways to get revenue.
That's it for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News. First, a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to vtex.com/emarketer to learn more. All right, folks, we are back today in other news. Snapchat recently announced 2 new AR partnerships, Gen X's adoption of social media, and Gen Z's relationship with influencers. Story 1. Snapchat recently announced 2 new augmented reality partnerships, notes insider intelligence analyst Nina Getson. AR startup Vertebrae, which helps brands make digital 3D versions of their products, and a partnership with luxury e-commerce site Verishop. This deal aims to bring a mini version of Verishop's fashion and beauty catalog to Snapchat, where its products can then be tried on virtually through AR and bought from the platform. Snapchat has been trying out AR for e-commerce for 3 years now. A few months ago, they bought Screenshop, which uses AR to make clothing recommendations based on photos users take. So, Nazmor, how are Snapchat's AR ambitions coming along?
I think that they're going in the right direction, and overall, all these AR things I see as a bigger picture just to play into the social commerce market. We're forecasting social commerce to be pretty big in the US in 2021, I think above like $30 billion. And we already know the main players in that are going to be like Facebook and Instagram. But Snapchat has a unique opportunity here by making their products a little bit different from like Facebook, where it's just a bunch of links and picture posts with the product on there. If AR technology really takes off and a lot of people use this to try on clothes or even like look through things like glasses and other stuff, it might be a way for them to enter into the market and not have to directly compete with Facebook and the other players in there.
Yeah. Yes, Nina points out that for those who do use AR to shop, it can be quite effective since interacting with products via AR showed a 94% higher conversion rate than products without AR. There was some Shopify data cited by the Harvard Business Review. Alex Heath of The Verge points out that when you piece together Vertebrae with Snapchat's other shopping-related acquisitions and features, including Fit Analytics and Screenshot, it's easier to get a sense of its ambitions to be a shopping destination. For brands, the company is setting up a self-service system to easily upload and manage AR versions of their products that people can discover in Snapchat. Story 2. Co-founder and chief executive of Open Influence, Eric Dahan, recently wrote in The Drum about why he thinks Clubhouse has proved that Gen X still has something to say, as it oftentimes is seen as the forgotten generation when it comes to social media. Ironic, considering they invented the category and were largely responsible for the internet itself. But with Clubhouse, Gen X appears to be defying adoption patterns. The top creators aren't Gen Z up-and-comers for a change, he says. So yeah, Nazmul, what did you make of this idea that Gen X has found its voice on Clubhouse?
I think that means that Marcus, you should try it out, and maybe you could find another foothold there. Besides kidding, though, that's pretty interesting because I think it really looking into a market of a group of people who are older who think that maybe social media isn't for them and they can't really market themselves the way in social media because they didn't grow up in that environment like the Gen Z users did. So Clubhouse uniquely is catering to them and giving them a space for them to expand. But also, it's like I think Clubhouse, the way it started out with, it's like restrictive membership because you can only join through like the links and stuff like that. That's the main reason you see a lot of younger users not on it. They usually just flood to the free to use and open websites and social media platforms.
Yes, they've now removed that restriction, so it is open to anybody. It's not invite only, but yes, was invite only up until very, very recently. I was looking at some of our numbers just before we hit record, looking at Gen X's and how many of them use the different social media platforms. The highest share of them use Facebook, 70% this year. That's behind millennials, 83%. So in second place on Facebook, 70%, as I mentioned. Then you've got Instagram, 36% of them use Instagram, 34% use Pinterest, 18% use Twitter, 15% use Snapchat, and 13% of Gen X people use TikTok. Story 3, Gen Z people, 16 to 24, they rank Instagram influencers as the most genuine. 32% said that, according to a new survey by text communications platform SlickText. Double the share of respondents age 25 plus who picked Instagram. Among Gen Z respondents who influencers followed, they said TikTok was in second place with 28%, Facebook with 11%, and Twitter with 5% with regards to the ranking of who they found most genuine. So Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. This was noted by Dan Pachum of Chain Store Age. Online reviews were the influencer content they found most helpful, according to nearly every age category. Among everyone, the number one factor eroding trust in an influencer was too many sponsored posts, followed by politicized content, using stereotypical influencer phrases, and having photos that look too edited. Respondents preferred to hear from influencers several times a day. Nazmul, your thoughts on this research?
Well, the first and foremost is that it's interesting that Snapchat's not included, but when you think about it, Snapchat's not really a place for influencers as much as Instagram is. But they both compete for that big group of Gen Z active users. They're the biggest group. Gen Z uses both Snapchat and Instagram. And so this is one way where I guess Instagram has a leverage over them. And I guess, from what you said from the article, is that people want more what they feel like is genuine posts or people's recommendation, actual reviews, instead of having paid content on there, which they feel like they can't trust just because it's paid for. So they're going to post it regardless. And it's interesting to me that people will actually read these things and make a lot of purchase decisions and other stuff just based on what other people on the internet are saying.
Mm-hmm. That's all we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much to my guest. Thank you, Nazmul.
No problem. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. Thanks to Victoria, who edits the show. Thanks to everyone for listening. See you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, new marketer podcast made possible by VTEX.